perhaps connected to Siberia here. We're not talking about the lost land bridge of the last ice age. It's a theorization about what the relationship between these continents were that dates back to Columbus, because of course he thought the Americas were just an extension of Asia or the east coast of East Asia. So, and then we have an interior of South America. We have an outline. It's beautiful, looks very much like what we understand the outline of South America to look like. But the interior is a disaster because most of the Europeans had not penetrated much in the interior. They had taken, and a lot of information came from Native Americans, from indigenous peoples. It was poorly understood and translated. So you have a mixture of things that, if we look at it from the lens of, say, 19th or 20th century cartography, what a 19th or 20th century cartographer would have done would just, if they weren't sure about it, they would have left it blank. And you just, have these conjectures. And sometimes you even see this on maps not so long ago of Antarctica, about the conjectured coastline underneath the ice pack. I don't think you see it anymore now because all of the various technologies, they know pretty solidly where the outline of the continent is under the ice pack. But you have always in a map a mixture of things that you think either might be or ought to be, with things that you're pretty sure about. I don't think cartographers would always put it, these cartographers wouldn't have put it quite in those terms, but effectively that's what's going on. And this gets back again. These are things that are presenting these things as facts, but it's a mixture of things that people have seen with their own eyes or have gotten third hand or second hand from other people who've seen their own eyes, and things that they're sort of constructing out of reading travel accounts and other kinds of things, and even existing theories about the way the world works, and putting them together. The great analog for this, I think, is the nightly weather broadcast, which has, I don't know if Tom Skilling comes out quite this far, the WGN broadcaster, but I'm sure in the local stations there's a comparable thing. You get a radar map, and you know it's all scientific-y because it's got isotherms and stuff, and it looks all very scientific. You get a radar map that shows what the weather did today, and then you get another map that looks almost identical, that tells you what the weather is going to do tomorrow. And in order to convince you that that prediction is accurate for tomorrow, where we all know they have a 50% chance of being wrong, is that they presented in exactly the same set of conventional symbols as the factual map, if we can call it that, of recounting what happened in the past. So there's always a blending of these. By presenting a seamless image here, you're not really challenging. You're taking things that are known and mixing it with things that are unknown. They were very comfortable doing that because that's partly what maps were trying to do, was trying to work these things out. But it is something that leads us into some pretty bizarre, sometimes some fairly bizarre retrospective interpretations of what a map was trying to say. So I don't think, I'm just going to say, it's not enough to just call these inaccuracies myths. It's important to understand in the context that people were just trying to work these things out.
Yeah, but there's also another possibility that pertains on some maps, and that is these maps were designed to be persuasive in a way. They're not just designed to, reflect accurate information and the weatherman's best guess of what's going to happen, but are designed specifically to persuade you to think a certain way. And this is a great example of persuasive cartography, the Chatelaine map of Nouvelle France. This is Louisiana, and this map was made, and we have some copies of this and some other related maps at the Newberry, that this map was made to promote settlement of Louisiana, to convince people to come from France over to the New World and settle in this great continent. So if you look at it, and maybe you guys could just come up a little closer. I know that you've looked at this before, but I just wondered if you could just give me your reactions as to what aspects of this map would, if you were an 18th century French person and you saw this map, what are the dimensions of it that might help persuade you that, yeah, I could go live in Louisiana. That might be a good thing. What is persuasive about it? Yeah, go up and take, because it's a.
You can't do it from 10
You
feet
can't do
away.
it from 10 feet away. Just go up and take a good look and just, pick out a few details that you think make that place, this new land of Louisiana, look like it might be appealing.
I think it really expansive, like it's a lot wider than like what as we see it today. So it's like, oh, there's a lot of land there. So
Open, yeah, there's a lot of space. I could have a lot more space, get a lot more land for my buck than I could in France. That's absolutely true. Some of the persuasiveness is in the tiny little details. It's not, but the idea of a lot of space is certainly part of it.
You can't say I'm all that convinced by this map.
Yeah. Well, what does it tell? If you were going to this place, this new colony, how would you get around? What kind of transportation possibilities are there?
Boats,
Boats?
river boats.
Look, and it looks like you can get just about anywhere on a river. It seems like there's the rivers link up the whole continent. That it seems like it always reminds me of like the Chicago CTA map. It seems like, oh, you can get anywhere on the train. I mean, the rivers do not connect up that tidally, but they do in reality, but they do on this map. It looks like,
And where there's rivers, there's what?
Things to hunt.
Well, water.
Yeah.
Water,
it's important to have water.
Natural, it's important to have water, yeah.
Now, if you're going to have a farm, you need to be near water. If you like to eat fish, water is good. And
What does this map say about the relationship between the French colonies in North America and the British colonies in North America?
so here are the British up here in New England.
Who's going to control the center of the continent?
The French.
Yeah, it looks like it. What did the Charter of Virginia say? Or of Carolina? Back to your high school history.
Yeah. Remember when
Those were chartered to run from sea to sea.
sea to shining sea? You've heard that
And
phrase?
there is no evidence here. Remember that Virginia, after the American independence, had all this land to the west that they claimed as a colony that depended on the British, on the original charter of Virginia. And this is the same with Carolina. Tennessee was carved out of the western part of North Carolina. None of that shows up here because this is a French map, and the French are trying to convince you that this is a vast area that they have control, running from the St. Lawrence through, and the British are just confined to this little area inside the Appalachians, just between the Appalachians and.
So it really does look like the New World is largely New France. The other thing, I mean, if you look closely, the little tiny pictures on this map are wonderful, and you'll see little, Indians traveling in canoes, again, making the point that it's easy to get around. You'll see lots of game, there are chickens and deer and, Indians with bows and arrows hunting. It just seems like you're not going to have any trouble finding food in this place. And then you have up here, this is an inset of the Gulf of Mexico that was actually mapped later, that shows you in more detail the area around New Orleans and Lake Pontchartrain. So you have this, sort of close-up inset of this, wonderful natural harbor. So it really does seem like the land of milk and honey in a way, that this is, going to be a very sort of appealing place. And I think we could compare it productively to this map of DeKalb. And you might not think of this as persuasive cartography in the same way, because it seems like a much more utilitarian map of DeKalb. But it does have a persuasive dimension, but that dimension is not as readily apparent just from this map. This Warner and Beers production also appeared in a book. You know, we're talking about a lot of these maps have been separated from atlas context, but this is from a tradition called county atlases. Have any of you seen county atlases? Well, basically, it's an atlas just of an individual county. So there's one of DeKalb County, and several, yeah. But and it would have included this map, kind of as an overview map, but it would have, the pages of this county atlas would have included a lot of other kinds of material. Now, it's called an atlas to sort of call attention to its cartographic dimension. It sounds like a scientific survey of DeKalb County, this county atlas. But what it actually included were lots of engravings of individual homes and points of interest. Like, I bet we were at lunch, we were talking about this rust-colored building that's now being redeveloped in town. That building is probably on a page, identified.
Probably had a picture of the castle.
Probably had a picture of the castle here at NIU, what was then the normal school. It would have had a picture of pictures of the prominent churches, schools, and public buildings that would have shown you that DeKalb is a really up-and-coming place. It had schools, it has churches, it has public buildings, it has fine post offices that make it seemed not like a frontier outpost, but a very built-up place, even though they all might just be on one block, but they would each be on their own page in this atlas to make them seem bigger and part of a larger whole. And the other really interesting thing about these county atlases is they include pages of individual people's homes and farms. And the way that worked is if you wanted to be included in a county atlas, they were sold by subscription. So somebody would come around to your house and knock on the door and say, I'm putting together this atlas of DeKalb County. Do you want to be in it? If you wanted to be in it, you would give them some money, which would guarantee that you would get a copy of the book when it was finished. And then they would make a picture of your house, draw it, and then engrave it and put it in the atlas. So you would be then sort of inserted into this history of DeKalb County. And you would have the opportunity to shape your history a little bit. They would often include some text that was a narrative about maybe how your family came to this part of the world. You could sort of embellish their success a little bit. And if the house was maybe not quite finished, you were going to add a new roof next year, you could just tell the artist, well, I'm going to add a new roof, so go ahead and show that in the picture. Or I have plans to put a fine picket fence there. Just go ahead and add that fence now into the picture. So you could present a more well-to-do portrait of yourself and your land and your house than you had actually gotten to yet. So they had this aspirational quality and promotional quality that is very similar to the map of French Louisiana that we saw. Yes, let's go to the next room.
Well, this room is a little more eclectic than the previous one, so there's a lot of little things that one can say, or big things, or important things, really. I do see some unity in these, and that for at least these three maps are all three maps that demonstrate the, excuse me, something in my eye, demonstrate the importance of or demonstrate the frequent use of what we might say art in maps as a way of adding some dimension to the depiction. Sometimes, as in the case of this double hemisphere map, you're partly just trying to fill out the rectangle, but also there's all sorts of allegorical representations referring to the different continents, sometimes to signs of the zodiac. You'll find arms of the particular government or person that the item was to be dedicated to. This was a very common design in 17th century Dutch mapping. This is from the great Dutch cartographer William Janszoon Blauw, where you sometimes would find this in very large wall maps as well. There are counterparts to this that are much, much larger that were meant to be displayed on walls, where you have depictions of people from different parts of the world and cities. And it shows that these maps were being used in a way like as encyclopedias, that there might have been accompanying text in the pages preceding the map or on the back of the map, intending to give you a brief description of the particular part of the world that you were doing. And mapping was just only one part of the graphic quality of this. This was meant to be something for kind of an armchair geographer, so you have a sense not only of what Brazil looks like, but what the people of Brazil might look like. And often they were drawing these from existing travel accounts and incorporating them, so it's a little compendium. And of course, wonderful little miniature views of cities, things that you could never navigate around in cities, but to give you a sense of the importance of cities in the Americas, which would have been something that colonial powers would have wanted to emphasize.
So these are like little miniature versions of that map of Genoa that you have in the case out there, sort of meant to be sort of, signs of local, of a specific locality. But these maps that have all of these pictorial elements also really illustrate the interdependence between map making and other forms of art history and visual production during the time period that they were made. So these little maps of the sort of native peoples of this land were very similar to the kinds of illustrations that you would see in costume books from the period. That was sort of another genre that people who were putting on stage productions and making clothing and doing all kinds of things, just like we would look at the fashion plates in Vogue magazine or something like that today to learn about fashion. They had these costume books that included international costumes as well as costumes for your own country, and they that probably was the same artists who would draw these on maps that would draw them for these costume books. So there was a lot of sort of cross-pollination between these different genres, and you see this in this wonderful map, late 19th century map, that where the map is almost like an inset against this landscape depiction of this particular department of the possessions of France. It's almost like that map, the Chatelaine map writ large, that had little tiny animals and natives and interspersed amid the rivers and mountains, and here you have even more realistic depictions, but it's that same idea of giving you a full impression of the landscape, that it's it's populated by all these different animals and these different kinds of people, and has waterfalls and pyramids and this kind of flora. So it's that sort of encyclopedic emphasis, but it all looks very non-threatening and sort of lush and inviting.
When you were putting together that room and this half of this room, what were your thoughts in arranging these maps in this way? Was there a particular sense that these maps here in this alcove belong together, or was there any sense of order? I know that they're all world maps over on that one wall. Were there any particular, what were some of the guiding thoughts that you had about choosing all of these maps, which in some sense are very similar and they come out of the same sort of general period? No?
I think partially, part of our decision was based on the fact that, some of these maps have more prevalent aesthetic qualities,
Right.
which sort of works with the art aspect that we were trying to tackle on this side.
Okay.
That was one of the reasons.
Well, that was clear.
That came through really nicely.
And led nicely then, of course, into a discussion of art. What made you decide to do celestial cartography and to put it off in that little
we were donated those lovely celestial maps. We were loaned those lovely celestial maps by the Oppenheimer Gallery in Chicago. And that's one of the places for antique prints and all sorts
Yeah,
of...
let's come in here.
Oh yeah, they're one of the places.
It was a good choice, and the fact that it's an octagon.
Octagon,
Sort
yeah.
of suggests a planetarium,
Yeah, we
arrangement.
thought that you chose the black walls specifically, so that was a really good call. Well, so can you tell a little bit more about how that relationship with the Joel Oppenheim came about? I mean, did you call him up and say, we're doing this exhibition, can you help us, or how did that happen?
Professor Van Ale would be the one to
Yeah.
speak to about
Can
that.
you fill us in? Did
He
you-
told us that, hey, I talked to the Oppenheimer, they'd like to loan us some things. And he's the one that spoke
So
to them.
did you already know them, or did you just pop in and say, I'm doing this exhibition with my class, can you help out?
Well, we had a relationship with them from a previous
Oh, okay.
exhibition on Audubon 6 years
Oh,
ago.
oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
They've always been involved also with highlighting ultimately some of the holdings of Chicago institutions, so then in this case being able to get the replicas of the Adler prints through them was kind of a logical thing to explore.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, but it also raises beyond just the didactic and beautiful quality of these prints, which is just undisputed. I mean, this is a really important atlas, and these are incredibly sort of fine reproductions. But they do all, because they are modern inkjet prints, they do raise the question of, I won't say the original and the copy, but the question of the sort of vintage print or sort of period copy versus the sort of more contemporary copy. So I wondered that was obviously a decision that you guys had to make. I wonder what your discussion about that issue was like. Did you?
I don't think we had that much of a discussion about it. I talked to some people about the fact that, for instance, they're very obvious about making it known that it's a
Right,
reproduction.
which is important.
Yeah, and I think that was something that definitely stuck out. But I don't know if, I don't know if there was a huge consideration about whether that mattered too much that it was. I know what
Are
you're
these all
saying,
from
but
the same atlas?
yeah.
Well, that's a consideration right there.
Yeah.
It's an important one. You were able to see much more of that atlas because of that.
Yeah, if you just had the book, you could just
Yeah.
have it open and maybe see two facing pages, and this way you can see several pages. So it definitely, and as we were talking earlier, it's much easier to display maps on the wall, and it's easier for viewers to appreciate them than when they're having to look in a book that's in a case that has glare.
Right.
And
Well, we had this discussion when we were working on this exhibition in the Field Museum, and I had been involved in the exhibitions at the Newberry many years, and I never questioned the notion of wanting to show originals in most cases. We had a couple proposals to them as curators about ways that we wanted to use facsimiles to, one particular one was to have a facsimile of a room in a Vermeer painting that would include, which famously in some of these Vermeer paintings had maps in them, and we wanted to do a full-size reproduction. But they had a very strong opinion about this, the Field Museum, and I'm sure many museums, but just about what their audience tells them time and time again is that they want it, especially when the idea was to show the rarest maps in the world and so on, that they wanted to have a sense that they were in the presence of the object. And there, of course, this is an obvious example of a consideration you make where other design choices trump that.
And
But it's an interesting issue because it does, that one part of the appeal is to feel like you're around an old object. I mean, isn't that part of why you went to the Newberry last week? So you'd be around, you have some old maps.
Oh, we're not
that
talking
you've
about
been
Jim and me.
No, well, we're old objects too, but that's another story. But you know, to be around, to be in the presence of that. And that's one of the reasons why we like showing things, because we feel like people react to them and they take on a life of their own in some ways. And again, because you can also see them in their original context wherever possible, or something close to their original context. We should be dressed in period costume, I suppose.
Right,
or-
yeah.
and open the windows wide open and stuff
But
like that.
it is an issue when you're thinking about your visitors, and I think you handled it really nicely by just having in, you know, very bold letters, archival inkjet print of hand-colored engraving. I mean, that just makes sure that all of your audience know that these are reproductions. And the fact that they're separated off in a separate room makes sense not only thematically because it's an atlas and it has this evocation of a celestial atlas and has this evocation of a planetarium, but you get a sense that, okay, these prints are different from the ones that we've just seen, which are, you know, from the 19th century or from the 16th century and so forth. So that's a great kind of museum and sort of gallery technique, is to use that kind of spatial separation to put objects that are kind of a different kind, as well as on a different theme.
So we're approaching 3 o'clock and you want to be done by 3:40, is that right?
Give or take.
Give or take?
Okay.
Okay, well, you see, we're not having any problems
Yeah.
talking about these things. I feel we are doing a little more talking and not listening to you, but I guess that's partly because obviously we were very inspired by this exhibit and found a lot of interesting things that were, and I should mention that the captions are very well written. It's so hard to write so little about something and say something important, but you managed to pick up, it seemed to be very consistently pick up important things to say, and I would say that was extremely well done.
And I'd like to hear just a little more, just before we go on, about your working process, like, and how you divided up the labor. Like, I know you worked on the cases out in the hallway, but like, did one of you take responsibility for these hilarious images and write the wall labels, or did you kind of all do everything? How did you divide up the work?
We kind of had sections divided up originally, but then people kind of crossed
Yeah.
into other sections too, but I primarily did this room.
Mhm.
And were you interested in astronomy or before you got into
Interested,
it?
I don't know much about it, but
Yeah.
interested, so it was fun to research, and I'm an art historian too, so that was, these obviously being the most, the most vibrant in terms of coloration and pictorial imagery,
Beautiful.
were exciting to look into. And then, yeah, I would say we kind of had certain areas, subjects that were thematically researched.
And then you would write the labels for your own sections, and then is that the way it
Yeah, but
generally
then there
happens?
was some going back and forth with labels too, and editing process, and
I was gonna
so
ask
we
if
had a
you-
lot
if
of
you-
people involved in each label, I would say.
Weighing in, yeah.
So
That's always helpful.
It's helpful, and it's also, an increasingly standard museum practice is you get lots of levels of editing and critique, so that you not only get lots of input on the text, but it also it makes it's less like reading a novel where you have sort of one person's voice. It has sort of this more collective voice of the exhibition, rather than occasionally you see some exhibitions that really bear the stamp of a curator who has a lot of personality, but increasingly they've been filtered.
Well, if the person who did all the research to write the label was the only person who had a hand in writing the label, nobody would understand the label, because you quite naturally leap over things that you understand that aren't clear in the label, and it's just like any other kind of writing. It's just all that much more critical because you count every character, and I thought it was well, Diane is the art historian, so she should probably take the lead in here, but let me just say, I'm so glad you decided to include Bucky Fuller in his Dymaxion map. Who came across this? Where is this from?
this is part of the collection.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that the art museum.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
Because indeed, it is a work of art, and but it is a map also.
So that, do you know anything about the history of like how the art museum here happened to get, I mean, it's kind of an unusual piece for an art museum to hold.
Well, actually, it's a simple story. 6 years ago, the Olson Gallery at the School of Art, we did an exhibition on Buckminster Fuller and John Cage, and the exhibition came to us, all the objects in it came to us through actually the gallery in Cincinnati that deals with Fuller's estate. And rather than paying them a rental fee for the loan of the objects, we acquired one of Buckminster Fuller's maps, and as the school is not a collecting entity, after the exhibition we transferred the map to the museum.
Oh, well, that's a perfectly logical way to acquire things. So if I'm remembering the chronology that you all mentioned at the beginning, the art exhibition across the hall was already had already been curated, and you knew what was going to be over there. So when you were deciding to have a section on contemporary art, you were sort of self-consciously wanting to complement what was across the hall, and what kinds of specific considerations came into your mind about that?
Professor Van Ale said, hey, I've contacted this artist, which was part of it, but these are sort of these navigational tools reinterpreted as art pieces. So in this particular case, I think it kind of goes along with one of our main themes, which is the different roles that maps and navigational tools have played throughout their history. Few people use an actual sextant for navigation. I'm sure there's people that do, but there's all sorts of digital satellite things now. But this is a role that it can still play as this art piece that is both harkening back toward the days when these sextants were used and talking about some of the things today.
So what do these three pieces do as works of art that they wouldn't do if they were the original artifacts?
I don't know. I believe that.
Oh, 4 pieces actually.
But yeah.
The artists.
Probably an intent. I would say even those maps, as you said, are interpretive in some ways, which you can say about this definitely, but the intent is to be specifically using maps to convey something other than, and I guess you could say that for those to some extent, but the practicality or the utility of them is taken out of it.
But when you were doing your research, and especially for the Solarius map, did you have a chance to visit the Adler Planetarium? Well, I recommend the next time you all go to Chicago, go to the Adler Planetarium, because in addition to the wonderful sky shows and things that they have in the planetarium proper, they also have a fabulous collection of historical instruments for astronomy, and that are they are scientific instruments, but they are some of the most amazingly beautiful objects that you'll ever see in a museum. And I was immediately reminded of those galleries when I saw these pieces by Michael Dings. Is that how he says his name? Or is it Ding? That they're at once incredibly beautiful and incredibly practical, and it's kind of the perfect marriage in a way, but that they do point back to that very sort of long tradition of, it goes back to what Jim was saying about craftsmanship earlier with the production of the maps by the Cart Lab and the use of the lettering, is that these instruments point to that tradition of craftsmanship, and that the surveyors who would have used them would have been, very adept at their craft, but that the instruments themselves were also incredibly well made. They were sort of really precision instruments, but also very sort of elegant pieces. So it all kind of comes together, the sort of visual elegance and sort of fine-tuned utility and and what they would ultimately
Yeah.
produce.
Well, I was very struck by the caption that accompanied
Yeah.
the back staff, which literally involved the act of the measurer turning his back to what he's measuring.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, I'm obviously old enough, I'm in my mid-50s, but how many of you can name and find 5 constellations in the sky, in the night sky? The Big Dipper, right? You can do the Big Dipper, I hope?
Yeah.
Maybe Orion. People using these instruments could name hundreds of constellations in the sky and locate them. And it seemed to me that one of the